All right, folks. So this is how this all fits together now that we're actually here in North America. What we're looking at is the struggles that are happening in not Great Britain yet, but it's still England. The struggles that are happening between the king, the struggles that are going to be happening in between the king and Parliament are important. Also, the struggle that happens with the church is important. Um, what you have is you have something called absolutism. Absolutism is movement by kings, by emperors, by people in government at that time to say, hey, listen, there should be one absolute authority. This is going to be promoted by Louis XIV of France, who's going to say, hey, listen, I am absolute king, I am absolute in charge, and everything I say goes. And he is able to dominate the government. He's able to dominate France, to be king in more than just name. Well, this establishes a trend. The trend being that, hey, what's going to happen is they're going to pick up on this in other countries. One of those is going to be King James. And this is important because what's going to happen is you are going to have other kings that are going to pursue this, and they're going to create a series of struggles. One of the things that comes out of this in England is going to be the Magna Carta. And the Magna Carta is dealing with a bit of an uprising of the lords in England who say, hey, listen, the king, we have some rights, we have an agreement, he has some duties, he has some rights. And what it does, it establishes the dynamic of English common law, that the king has limitations, that the lords and the people have rights and limitations, and it comes to a general agreement. Well, this allows us to proceed from the Magna Carta onwards, and this is the way it's going to work. What will happen is, in spite of the fact that we're going to shift between kings and queens, Henry VIII is going to eventually have a daughter. And then he's going to have a second daughter with another wife. And then he's going to have a series of wives. Eventually he's going to have a son. Well, what will happen is when he dies, his son will take over. His son is young. His son is infirm. He's sickly. His son is going to die young. And what will happen is it will revert to his daughter, which is something brand new in England, an actual queen by herself. Well, the queen is going to be Mary. Okay, that's going to be his original daughter. And Mary is Catholic. Henry was no longer Catholic. England was no longer Catholic. They were Protestant. And so what's going to happen is Mary is going to try to revert all of England back to the Catholic Church. This is not going to go over well for a variety of people. She is going to ally herself with Spain because, again, her mother comes from Spain. And she's going to pursue the Catholic religion. And so it's going to cause some people to want to flee England, and the natural thing is if they're going to flee, they're going to want to find someplace to go. The New World is going to be that place to go. And what will eventually happen is the powers behind the throne will put her sister, Elizabeth, in charge. And Elizabeth is a lot more palatable to the people in government because, again, Elizabeth is Protestant. She's not Catholic. And so there's going to be an ongoing struggle between who has power, which is either Mary or Elizabeth, which is either one of the queens or is going to be Parliament, which branch of religion is going to go. It's going to be a lot of dissension, and so a lot of people are going to seek an outlet, and that outlet is going to be travel to the New World. Okay? A couple of things are happening. We're looking at the advent of joint stock companies. Joint stock companies allow us to leave the idea of mercantilism and move into something a little bit more akin to capitalism. The idea here being is rather than one person risking all their money on a boatload of merchandise and having it sink and then go bankrupt, it allows a whole bunch of people to risk a little bit of money and to eventually cash in and make quite a bit of money. And so we end up starting with joint stock companies, and the joint stock companies allow us to go ahead and explore more areas. While this is going on, something else is going on. You're going to run into the English Civil War. The English Civil War is going to be Parliament against the king. This is important because what's going to happen is it's going to eventually result in Oliver Cromwell and Parliament taking over the government, imprisoning and eventually beheading the king, and establishing what becomes what's going to be a restored monarchy, and what's going to be with a king and queen ruling in what becomes a constitutional monarchy. A lot of things happening. That's mildly important because of these struggles about who's in charge. What religion is going to be dominant is going to keep on pushing people to the new world. And that's what's most important, is it keeps on pushing people to the new world. It advances the reason for England. And at this point, we're heading into what becomes Great Britain. It advances the reason for them to settle the new world. We're going to do that. When I mentioned that joint stock company, that's important because one of the first joint stock companies is going to settle is going to be the Virginia Company, and they're going to settle Jamestown. If you don't know much about Jamestown, you throw a whole bunch of people on a boat who have heard about gold, who have heard about riches, who have heard about adventure. You ship that on a boat to the New World. You promise them land. You promise them a certain number of things. They get to what becomes Virginia, and it turns out they don't know how to farm. Okay? They don't know how to farm. They don't know how to survive. Lucky enough for them, they're going to meet Native Americans who will try to teach them how to farm, how to survive. They are eventually going to last. What they discover in Virginia is this. They discover there's no gold. They discover there's no silver. They discover that the only thing of value is going to be a product, a crop called tobacco. And so they're going to start growing tobacco. I'm sorry, the people that go here are largely idiots because they're going to grow tobacco and not food. So there's going to be an incredible starving time. What you have to know about Jamestown is in the first several years, or for the first several years, there's an 80% die-off rate. 80% of the people that go to Jamestown die. All right, there's a starving time because they are not intelligent enough to quit growing tobacco and start growing more food. If it hadn't been for the Virginia Company shipping them new people each spring, okay, and refurbishing the population, it wouldn't have lasted. What we do get is eventually we get a settlement, all right? We get an established settlement. People quit dying off because of the diseases. They start to last longer. They establish a settlement. They establish their rights as Englishmen. They establish their own government there, the Virginia General Assembly. And what happens is because they are successful, we're going to look at the addition of other settlements. We're going to look at Maryland. We're going to look at Baltimore. We're going to look at Plymouth and the Mayflower Compact. We're going to look at the Massachusetts Bay Company. I'm just going to hit those briefly because there's a lot more information on them in the book than what I was first covering as far as the information about the settlement of man. What we look at is we look at an evolution in government. We look at a transition of more and more people into the new world. You're going to see people coming from France. You're going to see people coming from England. You're going to see people coming from Spain. We're using 3 different strategies to settle. Okay? The English are going to come in and they're going to bring some soldiers. They're going to bring some families and they're going to bring some businesses, and they're going to push the Native Americans out of the way. The Spanish will come in and they'll come in military fashion. They don't intend on staying, but they're going to go ahead and conquer and subjugate. The French are a bit more unique. They come in and they come in small groups or small parties, and they live amongst. They don't take over, they don't conquer, they live amongst and they trade. It's the British that are planning on staying. It's the British that are planning on colonizing. It's the British that are going to change the face of what's going on. This shift in religion, this shift in government, these struggles are all part of the reasons they end up with so many different kinds of people here. Okay? It's all about the transition. The other thing that this section talks about is going to be the introduction of African slavery into the New World. It talks about an awful lot of things. So what I'm going to do briefly is talk a little bit about the slave trade, talk a little bit about a couple of things, and that'll be it for this unit.